The rope snapped taut in Nathaniel Landry's calloused hands as the wild Mustang bucked against the restraint, sending dust billowing across the corral in the fading light of a Texas evening. The year was 1858, and like most men in Green River, Texas, Nathaniel had built his life around the unforgiving demands of the frontier. At 32, his sun-weathered face and quiet demeanor spoke of a man who'd seen his share of hardship but had never surrendered to it. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice low and steady as the horse's nostrils flared. "Nobody's looking to harm you." The Mustang's resistance gradually subsided, dark eyes regarding Nathaniel with a mixture of fear and reluctant acceptance. It was that moment of connection, that silent understanding, that made the long hours of breaking horses worthwhile. "You've got away with them," came a voice from behind. Nathaniel turned to see Samuel Wilson, the ranch owner, leaning against the fence post. "Just like you had with that gelding last week." Nathaniel nodded, removing his hat to wipe the sweat from his brow. "They just need patience, is all." "Well, that patience has earned you a bonus this month," Samuel said, tossing a small leather pouch that jingled when Nathaniel caught it. "Thought you might want to head into town, get yourself something nice." It had been weeks since Nathaniel had ventured into Green River for anything beyond necessities. The isolation of ranch life suited him fine, fewer complications, fewer disappointments. But as he secured the corral gate and watched the Mustang settle into its new surroundings, he decided perhaps a change of scenery might do him good. The following morning, Nathaniel rode into Green River on his chestnut mare, Penny. The town had grown considerably in the 5 years since he'd first arrived. What had once been little more than a trading post now boasted a hotel, a bank, several saloons, and a schoolhouse that doubled as a church on Sundays. As he tied Penny outside the general store, his attention was drawn to an unfamiliar woman emerging from the millinery shop across the street. She carried herself with a grace that seemed at odds with the dusty frontier town. Her blue dress was simple but well made, and her honey-brown hair was pinned neatly beneath a modest hat. Something about her, perhaps the way she glanced around with alert, intelligent eyes, caught his interest. Nathaniel watched as she nodded politely to passing townsfolk before disappearing into the bookshop, a place he'd never had reason to enter himself. He considered following her, curious about this stranger who seemed so out of place, but quickly dismissed the notion. He'd come to town for supplies, not to gawk at some Eastern woman who'd likely be heading back to civilization before the month was out. Inside the general store, he gathered the items he needed: tobacco, coffee, ammunition, and a new shirt to replace one that had been torn beyond repair. As the shopkeeper tallied his purchases, the bell above the door chimed and the woman from the millinery shop entered. Up close, he could see she was younger than he'd initially thought, perhaps 25 or 26, with eyes the color of warm amber. "Mr. Henderson," she greeted the shopkeeper with a smile that transformed her face. "I've come for that order of paper and ink you mentioned would arrive today. Miss Calloway, yes indeed, came in on yesterday's stage." Henderson abandoned Nathaniel's half-tallied goods to retrieve a package from beneath the counter. "Your students must go through supplies mighty quick." "They're eager learners," she replied, her voice carrying a hint of an accent that Nathaniel couldn't quite place. Not quite Southern, not quite Eastern. "Nathaniel, have you met our new schoolteacher?" Henderson asked, suddenly remembering his other customer. "Miss Emma Calloway arrived from Philadelphia last month. She's taken over for Mrs. Benson since her passing." Nathaniel nodded politely, uncomfortably aware of the dirt on his clothes and the stubble on his jaw. "Madam." "Mr. Landry," she acknowledged, her eyes appraising him with a directness uncommon in the women he'd known. "Miss Calloway has been a real blessing," Henderson continued, oblivious to Nathaniel's discomfort. "Already has the schoolhouse running smoother than it has in years." "It's nothing extraordinary," she demurred. "The children of Green River deserve a proper education, just like children anywhere." There was something in her tone, a conviction that ran deeper than simple professional dedication, that intrigued Nathaniel. But before he could ponder it further, she was paying for her supplies and bidding them both good day, As the door closed behind her, Henderson chuckled. Half the unmarried men in town are already sweet on her, though she doesn't seem to notice, too busy with those books and lessons of hers. Nathaniel merely grunted in response and completed his transaction, but as he rode back to the ranch, he found his thoughts repeatedly returning to the schoolteacher with the amber eyes and determined voice. 2 weeks passed before Nathaniel returned to Green River. This time, his visit coincided with a Saturday market that had drawn folks from the surrounding farms and homesteads. The town square bustled with activity vendors selling everything from fresh produce to hand-sewn quilts, children darting between stalls, and the ever-present sound of negotiation filling the air. He'd just finished purchasing some dried apples when he spotted Miss Calloway across the square. She was speaking with Margaret Fuller, who worked as a laundress for several of the town's more affluent families. Something about their interaction caught his attention: the furtiveness, the way Miss Calloway glanced around before handing Margaret a small package wrapped in brown paper. Curiosity piqued, he watched as they parted ways, Margaret quickly tucking the package into her basket before hurrying toward the southern edge of town toward the collection of modest cabins where most of Green River's colored folk resided. It wasn't his business, he told himself, yet he found himself following at a discreet distance. Margaret's path led to a small cabin set back from the others, partially hidden by a stand of cottonwoods. She knocked in what seemed to be a pattern: 3 quick raps, a pause, then 2 more. The door opened just enough for her to slip inside, then closed quickly. Nathaniel hesitated, unsure what to make of this strange behavior. He was about to turn back when the door opened again and Miss Calloway herself emerged, looking far less composed than she had in town. Her hair was coming loose from its pins, and her expression was earnest as she spoke to someone still inside. "Same time next week," she said, her voice carrying on the still air. "And remember, if anyone asks, we just sew in quilts," came the reply from within. "Don't you worry, Miss Emma." "We've been careful." A chill ran down Nathaniel's spine. In Texas, teaching slaves to read was more than just frowned upon. It was illegal, punishable by fine or imprisonment. And judging by what he'd just witnessed, that seemed to be exactly what the respectable Miss Calloway was doing. He must have made some noise, for suddenly Miss Calloway's head whipped around, her eyes widening as they locked with his. For a moment, neither moved predator and prey, though Nathaniel wasn't sure which was which. Then she was striding toward him, her face a mask of determination despite the fear he could see behind it. "Mr. Landry," she said, her voice steady, "this is quite far from town for an afternoon stroll." "Wasn't strolling," he replied, keeping his voice neutral. "Saw something odd and followed it." "And what exactly did you see?" Her chin lifted slightly, a challenge in her stance despite being nearly a foot shorter than him. Nathaniel glanced toward the cabin, where faces had appeared at the window before quickly vanishing. "I saw enough, Miss Calloway." The color drained from her face, but she stood her ground. "And what do you intend to do with what you saw?" It was a fair question. By any measure of law or local custom, he should report her to Sheriff Taylor. Teaching slaves to read was seen as dangerous, a way to incite dissatisfaction and rebellion. Most folks in Green River would consider it their civic duty to put a stop to such activities, yet something held him back. Perhaps it was the memory of his father, who taught him that a man's character was measured by his willingness to do what was right, not what was easy, or perhaps it was simply the courage he saw in Emma Calloway's eyes. "That depends," he said finally. "On what?" "On why you're risking everything to do something that could land you in jail, or worse." She studied him for a long moment, as if weighing his worthiness for the truth. "Because it's right," she said simply. "Because being able to read is a fundamental human dignity that shouldn't be denied to anyone based on the color of their skin." Her words hung in the air between them, a declaration that could get her run out of town or worse if spoken in the wrong company. Yet she'd said it without hesitation, her conviction clear. "You're playing a dangerous game, Miss Calloway." "It's not a game to me, Mr. Landry." Her voice softened slightly. "These people deserve the chance to read the Bible for themselves, to write their own names, to read a letter from a loved one sold away. Wouldn't you want that basic dignity, The question struck him somewhere deep. He'd taken his own literacy for granted, never considering what it would mean to be denied such a fundamental tool for understanding the world. Before he could respond, a twig snapped nearby and they both tensed. Emma's hand flew to her throat. "Who else knows about this?" he asked quickly. "No one who would tell," she whispered. "Mr. Landry, I understand if you feel obligated to report what you've seen, but I implore you, I'm not going to report you," he interrupted, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. Relief washed over her face, quickly followed by suspicion. Why not? It was a good question, one he wasn't entirely sure he had the answer to. "Because some laws aren't just," he said finally. "My father taught me to recognize the difference." She regarded him with new interest. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," Nathaniel agreed, feeling a familiar pang at the memory. "Died standing up for what he believed in." A moment of understanding passed between them, and Emma seemed to come to a decision. "I should get back to town before my absence is noticed," she said. "But if you truly mean what you say about not reporting us, perhaps we could speak further on this matter. Tomorrow after church services." Nathaniel hadn't attended church in years, not since burying his father, but he found himself nodding. "I'll be there." She offered him a small, grateful smile before turning to leave, then paused. "Mr. Landry, thank you." He watched her walk away, her blue dress disappearing among the trees, and wondered what exactly he'd just committed himself to. One thing was certain: Emma Calloway was unlike any woman he'd ever met, and his life in Green River had just become considerably more complicated. The following day, Nathaniel sat uncomfortably in the back pew of the whitewashed church, feeling out of place among the Sunday finery of Green River's citizens. He'd made an effort with his appearance, donning his rarely worn suit and attempting to tame his unruly hair, but he still felt the curious glances of the regular congregants. Emma sat near the front with the other unmarried women, her posture perfect, and her attention seemingly fixed on Reverend Thomas's sermon about charity and goodwill toward all God's children. Nathaniel couldn't help but note the irony, given how many of those nodding in agreement would be appalled by Emma's actual demonstration of such principles. After the service, as people filtered out into the sunlight to exchange pleasantries, Nathaniel hung back, uncertain. Emma was surrounded by well-wishers and parents of her students, her smile polite but her eyes occasionally scanning the crowd until they landed on him. With practiced grace, she extricated herself from conversation and made her way toward him, navigating the churchyard with purpose. "Mr. Landry," she greeted him. "I'm glad you came. Would you care to walk with me? I find the air helps clear my thoughts after sitting so long." Several onlookers watched with interest as they fell into step together, heading away from the church and toward the quieter edge of town. They walked in silence until they were beyond earshot of others, the only sounds the rustle of Emma's skirts and the distant call of meadowlarks. "I've been thinking about what you witnessed yesterday," Emma began, her voice low, "and I realize I've placed you in an uncomfortable position." "If you've reconsidered," "I haven't," Nathaniel interrupted, "but I am curious how you came to be involved in something so risky, especially being new to town." Emma sighed, her pace slowing. "It wasn't planned. When I arrived in Green River, I was simply looking to make a fresh start. Teaching has always been my calling, and when I heard about the position here, it seemed perfect." "What changed?" "I met Harriet," she said simply. "She works in the hotel kitchen. Her daughter Sarah is about 9, bright as can be, always watching me with these curious eyes whenever I'd pass by. One day, Sarah was sweeping the hotel porch when she found a discarded primer book, when her master caught her looking at it." Emma's voice tightened. "He took a switch to her hands until they bled, then burned the book in front of her." Nathaniel felt a surge of anger. "Who did that?" "It doesn't matter," Emma said, though her own anger was evident. "What matters is that when Harriet told me this story, weeping as she tended her daughter's hands, I couldn't just offer empty sympathy, not when I had the ability to do something about it." They reached a fallen log by the creek that ran along the eastern edge of town, and Emma sat, arranging her skirts around her. "So you began teaching them in secret," Nathaniel said, remaining standing. She nodded. "Just Harriet and Sarah at first." Then Margaret learned of it and asked if her brother could join. It grew from there. We're careful we meet in different locations, never at the same time. The books and writing materials are hidden in a false bottom I had constructed in my trunk, and no one suspects. Henderson at the store mentioned your unusual supply orders. I explain it away as materials for the school children, she said, and I do use much of it for them. No one questions a dedicated teacher. Nathaniel removed his hat, turning it in his hands as he considered her words. It's still a considerable risk. If you're caught, I know the consequences, she interrupted, her amber eyes meeting his directly. I accepted them the moment I decided to act rather than simply feel sorry. Her courage impressed him, but concern lingered. These people you're teaching, they face even worse consequences than you would. They know that better than either of us, Emma said softly, yet every single one chose to take that risk. They understand the danger, Mr. Landry. What they asked was if I did. Nathaniel nodded slowly, understanding dawning. These weren't helpless souls being led into danger by an idealistic northerner. They were people making a calculated choice to claim something denied them, with Emma as their willing ally. So, she said after a moment, smoothing a wrinkle from her dress, now you know everything. The question is, what happens next? Nathaniel looked out across the creek, watching the water flow over smooth stones. What indeed? He could walk away, pretend he'd seen nothing. It would be the prudent choice, the safe choice. But as he looked back at Emma, this woman who'd come to a strange town and risked everything for a principle, he knew he couldn't simply walk away. I want to help, he said, the words surprising him even as he spoke them. Emma's eyes widened. Help? You mean? I mean I want to help you teach them, he clarified, if you'll have me. For a moment she seemed speechless, searching his face as if for signs of deception. Why would you take such a risk? You have no personal stake in this. It was a fair question, one he'd been asking himself since yesterday. My father believed that education was a right, not a privilege, he said slowly. He taught escaped slaves to read on our farm in Kentucky, hidden in our root cellar. When he was discovered, men came in the night. They hung him from our own oak tree. Emma's hand flew to her mouth. Mr. Landry, I'm so sorry. I was 15, he continued, the memories flooding back. Too young to stop it, old enough to understand why it happened. I've spent years telling myself there was nothing I could have done differently, that standing up only gets you killed. Maybe it's time I stopped hiding behind that excuse. Emma rose from the log, taking a step toward him. What you're offering means more than I can express. But I need to be certain you understand the danger. This isn't just about breaking an unjust law. There are people in this town who would react violently if they discovered what we're doing. I'm aware, he said simply. She studied him a moment longer, then nodded. Very well. We meet again tomorrow evening after sunset. There's an abandoned trapper's cabin about 2 miles north of town, near the bend in the river. Do you know it? I do. Come there at 8. And Mr. Landry? Yes, a small smile curved her lips. I believe it's time you called me Emma. Nathaniel felt an answering smile form. Only if you call me Nate. Nate, she repeated, as if testing the name. Until tomorrow, then. As he watched her walk back toward town, Nathaniel felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time, a sense of purpose, of doing something that mattered. And beneath that, a growing admiration for the schoolteacher who'd awakened it. The abandoned trapper's cabin was little more than a shell, its roof partially collapsed and its single window covered with a piece of burlap. Yet as Nathaniel approached the following evening, he could see the faint glow of lamplight through the cracks in the walls. He tied his horse to a tree a distance away and approached cautiously, alert for any sign they weren't alone. He knocked softly 3 quick raps, a pause, then 2 more, mimicking what he'd seen Margaret do. The door creaked open just enough for him to slip inside, and he found himself in a small space made warm by the presence of 8 people and a carefully shielded lantern. Emma stood at one end of the room, chalk in hand, writing letters on a small slate propped against the wall. She paused mid-sentence when he entered, relief evident in her expression. Everyone, she said quietly, this is Mr. Landry. He's going to be helping us from now on. The faces that turned to him showed varying degrees of suspicion and hope. Nathaniel recognized Margaret and guessed that the woman with the thin young girl beside her must be Harriet and Sarah. The others, an elderly man, two young men who might have been brothers, and a woman in her 30s, were unfamiliar. "Evening," he said, removing his hat. "I'm honored to be here." The elderly man spoke first, his voice weathered but strong. "Miss Emma says you caught her teaching and didn't turn her in. Why's that?" It was a direct question, and Nathaniel appreciated the man's forthrightness. "Because I believe what she's doing is right. My own father taught folks to read when it wasn't allowed. I'm here to continue his work." The man studied him, then nodded slowly. "I'm Isaiah. Been waiting 63 years to learn these letters. Reckon I can trust the man helping me do it." One by one, the others introduced themselves. The brothers were Samuel and Joseph. The older woman was called Martha. Each had their own reason for being there, their own hunger for the knowledge being denied them. "We were just reviewing the alphabet," Emma explained, gesturing for Nathaniel to join her. "Perhaps you could work with Sarah and Joseph on their letters, while I help the others with forming simple words." The class proceeded with whispered instruction and careful movements to avoid making noise that might carry beyond the cabin walls. Nathaniel found himself impressed by the students' determination. Despite working from dawn until dusk, they summoned the energy to focus intently on their lessons, treasuring each new sound and shape mastered. Sarah, in particular, showed a remarkable aptitude, her small fingers tracing letters in the dirt floor with precision beyond her years. "You're doing wonderfully," he encouraged her after she correctly identified all the letters he showed her. She looked up at him with solemn eyes. "My mama says once I learn all the letters, I can read the Bible myself. Is that true, Mr. Landry?" The simple question caught him off guard with its poignancy. "Yes," he answered, his voice rougher than he intended. "That's absolutely true." As the lesson concluded, Emma gave each student a small scrap of paper with letters to practice hiding and a sliver of pencil. "Remember," she cautioned, "practice only when you're certain you're alone and destroy the paper afterward." When the last student had slipped out into the darkness, Emma sank onto a rough wooden stool, exhaustion evident in the slope of her shoulders. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Having another teacher makes it possible to give them more individual attention." Nathaniel nodded, helping her gather the few materials they'd brought. "They're quick learners." "They have to be," she replied. "We have so little time and the stakes are so high." She glanced up at him. "How did you find it, teaching?" "Harder than breaking horses," he admitted with a small smile. "But more rewarding too." Emma laughed softly, the sound warming the dilapidated cabin. "That's an apt comparison. Both require patience and a gentle hand." Their eyes met in the lantern light, and something shifted between them, a recognition, perhaps, of shared purpose and understanding. Nathaniel looked away first, suddenly aware of how alone they were. "We should head back," he said. "Separately would be safest." Emma nodded, extinguishing the lantern. "Same time Thursday, I'll be here." As they stepped outside, the night air cool against their faces, Emma paused. "Nate, what you're doing, it means everything to them, to me as well." Before he could respond, she had disappeared into the darkness, leaving him with a strange flutter in his chest that had nothing to do with the danger of their mission and everything to do with the woman leading it. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. 3 evenings a week, Nathaniel would make excuses to leave the ranch and join Emma at various locations for the clandestine lessons. Sometimes they met at the trapper's cabin, other times in the root cellar of an abandoned homestead, or in a clearing deep in the woods that could only be reached by a hidden path. Their students progressed steadily, moving from simple letter recognition to forming words in short sentences. The joy on Isaiah's face when he first spelled his own name brought tears to Emma's eyes, and Nathaniel had to look away, overcome by the simple power of that moment. Beyond the lessons themselves, Nathaniel found himself drawn more and more to Emma. Her dedication to their students was matched only by her cleverness in keeping their activities secret. She crafted elaborate systems for passing messages, rotating meeting locations, and creating teaching materials that could be quickly hidden or destroyed if necessary. One evening in late October, as they walked back toward town after a session, Emma confided in him further. "I never told you why I left Philadelphia," she said, her breath forming small clouds in the chilly air. "I assumed it was for the teaching position," Nathaniel replied. She shook her head. "That was the opportunity, not the reason. The truth is, I was involved in similar work there, helping at a school for freed colored children. When Pennsylvania passed stricter fugitive slave laws, many of our students were at risk of being captured and sent south." "What happened?" Emma's pace slowed. "We tried to help some of them reach Canada. One night, slave catchers raided a house where 3 children were hiding. There was a struggle. A man was killed." Nathaniel stopped walking, turning to face her. "Were you there?" "No," she said, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. "But I had arranged their transportation. After that night, it became too dangerous for anyone associated with the school. We dispersed, took new positions in different states. I came as far west as I could manage." The revelation settled between them. Emma wasn't just a well-meaning teacher. She was someone who had already faced the consequences of standing against injustice. "You're braver than I gave you credit for," Nathaniel said softly. "Not brave," she corrected. "Just unable to live with myself otherwise." She looked up at him, her expression earnest. "What about you? After what happened to your father, how did you end up in Texas?" "I tried staying in Kentucky, but everywhere I went, I saw that oak tree." Nathaniel's jaw tightened at the memory. "My mother died when I was young, and without Pa, there was nothing keeping me there. I drifted west, worked ranches in Missouri, Oklahoma Territory, finally settled here 5 years ago. Samuel Wilson's a fair employer, and the work suits me." "And in all that time, you never spoke about what happened to your father." "Never found anyone who'd understand," he admitted. "Until now." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Emma looked away first, adjusting her shawl around her shoulders. "It's getting late," she murmured. "We should continue on." As they resumed walking, their hands brushed accidentally, and Nathaniel felt a jolt of awareness that had become increasingly familiar in Emma's presence. He'd tried to tell himself his interest in her was purely about their shared cause, but in moments like this, the lie became impossible to maintain. When they reached the edge of town, where they would need to part ways to avoid suspicion, Emma hesitated. "There's a harvest dance at the schoolhouse next weekend," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "As the teacher I'm expected to attend, it might seem less conspicuous if we were occasionally seen together in public." Nathaniel recognized the practical logic of her suggestion, but also the invitation beneath it. "I'm not much for dancing," he said cautiously. A small smile played at the corner of her mouth. "Neither am I, truthfully. But I'm told even standing awkwardly at the refreshment table is easier with company." He couldn't help but return her smile. "In that case, I'd be honored to escort you, Miss Calloway." "Wonderful," she said, her cheeks coloring slightly. "I should go now. Good night, Nate." "Good night, Emma," he replied, watching until she had safely reached the boarding house where she lodged before turning toward the livery to retrieve his horse. As he rode back to the ranch under a canopy of stars, Nathaniel acknowledged what he'd been avoiding for weeks. He was falling in love with Emma Calloway. And that complicated everything about their already dangerous situation. The harvest dance transformed the simple schoolhouse, with paper lanterns strung from the rafters and autumn leaves adorning every available surface. The town's residents had turned out in their finest clothes, the women in colorful dresses saved for special occasions, the men uncomfortable but resigned in stiff collars and polished boots. Nathaniel waited outside, shifting his weight from one foot to the other as his eyes repeatedly darted to the boarding house across the street. When Emma finally emerged, he momentarily forgot the discomfort of his formal attire. She wore a dress of deep burgundy, simpler than many of the others but perfectly suited to her slender frame. Her honey-brown hair was arranged in a more elaborate style than usual, with small white flowers woven through the braids. "You look beautiful," he said when she reached him, the words escaping before he could consider them, her cheeks colored attractively. "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Landry." He offered his arm, and together they walked to the schoolhouse. aware of the curious glances from townsfolk unused to seeing the reserved cowboy in such company. Inside, the local musicians were already playing, several couples twirling around the cleared space that normally held desks. Emma greeted her students' parents and various town dignitaries, introducing Nathaniel with such natural ease that no one questioned their arrival together. "Miss Calloway," Sheriff Taylor approached, nodding politely. "A fine turnout for your first school social." "Indeed," Emma replied, her posture subtly tensing in a way only Nathaniel would notice. "The community has been very supportive." "Mr. Landry," the sheriff acknowledged, "don't often see you at these gatherings." "Miss Calloway was kind enough to invite me," Nathaniel replied evenly. His relationship with the sheriff was cordial but distant, both men preferring to maintain their privacy. "Well, it's good to see new faces," Taylor said, his gaze lingering on them a moment longer than necessary before he moved on to greet others. "He suspects something," Emma whispered once the sheriff was out of earshot. "He's naturally suspicious," Nathaniel assured her. "It's nothing specific to us." Before she could respond, the music changed to a livelier tune and several couples took to the floor for a reel. "Would you care to dance?" Nathaniel asked, surprising himself. Emma's eyebrows rose. "I thought you weren't much for dancing." "I'm not," he admitted. "But it seems a shame to waste the music, and I suspect standing together whispering looks more suspicious than joining in." She laughed softly. "A valid point, Mr. Landry. Very well, I accept." Nathaniel led her onto the floor, acutely aware of her hand in his. The dance brought them together and apart in a pattern that seemed to mirror their relationship, moments of closeness followed by necessary separation. When the music allowed, he held her waist, feeling the warmth of her through the fabric of her dress, memorizing the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled up at him. As the evening progressed, they danced several more times, conversed with various townsfolk, and maintained the appearance of a respectable courtship developing between the schoolteacher and the ranch hand. It wasn't entirely pretense, Nathaniel realized as he watched Emma laugh at something Reverend Thomas's wife said. What had begun as a shared secret had evolved into something deeper, more complicated. During a pause in the music, they stepped outside for air, walking to the quiet side of the schoolhouse where the stars were visible beyond the lantern light. "This was a good idea," Nathaniel said, leaning against the wall beside her. "Being seen together publicly makes our private meetings less suspicious." "Yes," Emma agreed, her eyes on the horizon, "though I confess that wasn't my only reason for suggesting it." Nathaniel turned to look at her, the moonlight illuminating her profile. "Oh." She met his gaze, something vulnerable in her expression. "I wanted to spend time with you outside of our lessons, to see if what I've been feeling is real or simply the result of our shared secret." His heart quickened at her honesty. "And what have you concluded?" "That I care for you, Nate," she said softly, "more than I should given our circumstances." The admission hung between them, fragile and momentous. Nathaniel stepped closer, raising a hand to gently touch her cheek. "I've been telling myself it was just admiration," he confessed. "But it's more than that, has been for weeks now." Emma leaned slightly into his touch. "It complicates things." "It does," he agreed, "and yet." She began, but her words faltered as his thumb traced the curve of her cheekbone. "And yet," he echoed, bending slowly to bring his face closer to hers, giving her every opportunity to step back. She didn't. Instead, she lifted her chin, and their lips met in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened with the release of weeks of unacknowledged tension. Nathaniel's arm encircled her waist, drawing her closer as her hands came to rest against his chest. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Emma looked up at him with a mixture of joy and apprehension. "What happens now?" It was a question with no simple answer. Their clandestine teaching already placed them at risk. A relationship between them would only raise the stakes. Yet Nathaniel couldn't bring himself to suggest caution or restraint, not when holding her felt so perfectly right. "Now," he said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, "we continue our work and we see where this leads us, if you're willing." Her smile was answer enough, but she spoke anyway. "I'm willing, Nate, though the path ahead won't be easy." "The worthwhile ones rarely are," he replied, taking her hand in his. "We should return before we're missed." As they rejoined the celebration inside, their fingers intertwined briefly before propriety demanded they separate. But something had fundamentally changed, a connection forged that would withstand the challenges to come, or so they hoped. The weeks following the harvest dance brought colder weather and new developments in their clandestine school. The need for a more permanent, heated location became apparent as temperatures dropped, making their outdoor meeting spots impractical. After careful consideration, Emma and Nathaniel decided to use the root cellar beneath the abandoned homestead, which offered both shelter from the elements and reasonable security. With Nathaniel's help, they reinforced the wooden trapdoor, installed simple benches, and created a ventilation system that would allow them to have a small fire for warmth without visible smoke. Their student group had grown to 12, with word spreading carefully among the enslaved community about the opportunity to learn. Their teaching methods evolved as well. Emma, drawing on her formal training, focused on reading and writing, while Nathaniel, to his surprise, discovered he had a knack for teaching mathematics. He used practical examples measuring land, calculating wages, estimating distances that resonated with their adult students. Young Sarah progressed most rapidly of all, her quick mind absorbing knowledge with a hunger that moved both teachers. By November, she was reading simple sentences from Emma's Bible and writing her own name with a steady hand. "She reminds me of you," Nathaniel remarked to Emma one evening as they prepared materials for the next lesson. They sat at the small table in Emma's boarding house room, a rare opportunity for private conversation granted by Mrs. Peterson's visit to her sister in Dallas. Emma looked up from the slate she was cleaning. "How so?" "That determination. The way she refuses to accept limitations others try to place on her," he smiled. "That stubborn tilt to her chin when she's concentrating," Emma laughed softly. "I hadn't noticed the similarity, but I'm flattered by the comparison." Her expression grew more serious. "I worry about her, though. She's less cautious than the others, too eager to show what she's learned." "Her mother watches her carefully," Nathaniel reassured her. "Harriet understands the risks better than any of us." Emma nodded, but concern lingered in her eyes. "I received a letter yesterday from a friend in Philadelphia. The situation there has worsened, more raids, more captures. She writes that even free black citizens don't feel safe." Nathaniel reached across the table to take her hand. "We're doing what we can where we can." "Is it enough?" she asked, the question that haunted them both finally spoken aloud. "It has to be," he answered simply. "For now, at least." They worked in companionable silence for a while, their hands occasionally brushing as they shared materials. These quiet moments had become precious to them, both stolen hours when they could simply be together without pretense or fear. Their relationship had deepened in the weeks since the harvest dance. They were careful to maintain propriety in public, but the town had begun to accept their courtship as natural. Sheriff Taylor still watched them with occasional suspicion, but even he seemed to have concluded they were simply an unlikely pair drawn together by genuine affection, which was true as far as it went. What no one in Green River suspected was how that affection had been born of shared danger and moral purpose, or how it continued to grow stronger through their secret work together. As Emma finished preparing the last of the teaching materials, she glanced up at Nathaniel with a hesitant expression. "There's something I've been meaning to discuss with you." "What is it?" he asked, noting her sudden seriousness. "Christmas is approaching and Mrs. Peterson has invited me to join her family in Dallas for the week." She set down her pencil. "I've been trying to determine what to do about our lessons during that time." Nathaniel considered this. The students would understand a brief pause. "Many will have increased duties during the holidays anyway." "That's true," she acknowledged. "But I was thinking, perhaps this might be an opportunity." "What kind of opportunity?" Emma leaned forward, her voice dropping despite their privacy. "Harriet mentioned that her master's family will also be traveling to Dallas for Christmas. She and Sarah will be left behind to watch the house with minimal supervision." Understanding dawned. "You're thinking this might be a chance for them to escape?" She nodded, her expression both hopeful and anxious. Sarah especially. She's young enough to build a new life, to live as a free person. I have connections, people who could help her reach Canada. Nathaniel sat back, the magnitude of what she was suggesting sinking in. Helping slaves learn to read was one thing, actively assisting in an escape was another level of risk entirely. The punishment for that would be severe, Emma, for everyone involved. I know, she said quietly, but sometimes I wonder if our teaching is crueler than we intend. We open their minds to possibilities they can't pursue, show them a freedom they can't fully claim. Her words struck him deeply. He'd had similar thoughts, watching their students' faces as they grasped new concepts, seeing the bittersweet realization of what had been kept from them and what still remained beyond reach. "Have you spoken to Harriet about this?" he asked. "Not directly. I wanted to discuss it with you first." She reached for his hand again. "I wouldn't ask you to be involved if you felt it was too dangerous. This would be my decision, my risk." Nathaniel shook his head immediately. "We're in this together, Emma. If you decide to help them, I'm with you." The relief in her eyes was palpable. "Thank you," she whispered. "But we should think carefully before committing. There would be no turning back once we begin." He nodded, knowing she was right. Helping Harriet and Sarah escape would forever alter their lives, regardless of the outcome. Yet even as caution urged restraint, he felt a certainty that this was the natural progression of the path they'd chosen. "We'll speak with Harriet at the next lesson," he decided. "See what she wants for herself and Sarah. This has to be their choice more than ours." Emma's smile was tinged with both affection and sadness. "You've come a long way from the man who followed me to that cabin intending to report what I was doing." "That man never existed," Nathaniel said softly. "I just needed reminding of who I really was." Their eyes held for a long moment, the connection between them deepening with each shared risk and decision. Then Emma glanced at the clock on her bedside table and sighed. "Mrs. Peterson will be back soon. We should finish these preparations." As they returned to their work, Nathaniel found himself contemplating a future beyond their current circumstances, one where they might not need to hide their relationship or their convictions. It was a dangerous thought, he knew. But looking at Emma, her brow furrowed in concentration as she carefully wrote out lesson plans, he couldn't help but hope for that possibility. 2 days later, they presented their idea to Harriet after the regular lesson had concluded and the other students had departed. The root cellar was warm from the small fire they'd maintained, casting flickering shadows on the earthen walls as Harriet listened to their suggestion, her expression unreadable. Sarah had fallen asleep on one of the benches, exhausted from a long day of work followed by the intensity of her lessons. Her small face, peaceful in sleep, underscored the stakes of their conversation. When Emma finished explaining the potential opportunity, Harriet remained silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on her daughter. "I've dreamed of her being free," she finally said, her voice barely audible. "Every night since she was born, never thought it might actually happen." "It would be dangerous," Nathaniel cautioned, "for all of us, but especially for you and Sarah." Harriet looked up at him, dignity evident in her posture despite the circumstances of her life. "Mr. Landry, we live with danger every day. The difference is this danger has purpose." Emma reached across to take the other woman's hand. "If you decide to attempt this, we'll do everything in our power to help you succeed, but the choice must be yours, Harriet." "And if we're caught?" Harriet asked directly. Neither Emma nor Nathaniel flinched from the question. "We would face imprisonment," Emma said honestly. "You and Sarah would likely be sold south separated." Harriet nodded, having already understood this reality. "What about the others?" she asked, gesturing to where their fellow students had sat. "They trust us if we disappear." "We would need to suspend the lessons for a time," Nathaniel admitted, "until any suspicion died down." This clearly troubled Harriet more than the personal risk. "They need these lessons as much as Sarah and I do." "We could resume eventually," Emma assured her. "Perhaps with different precautions. But Harriet, this opportunity having several days without direct oversight, it may not come again." Harriet stood and moved to her sleeping daughter, gently brushing a strand of hair from Sarah's face. "I need to pray on this," she said finally. "And talk to Sarah. She's young, but she deserves a say in her own life." "Of course," Emma agreed. "We have time yet before Christmas. Whatever you decide, we'll respect your choice." As they prepared to leave the root cellar, Harriet paused, looking back at them with unexpected gentleness. "You two got something special," she observed. "Don't often see white folks risk what they have for others. Makes me think maybe there's hope after all." The simple statement affected them both deeply, a reminder of the broader implications of their choices. After Harriet had woken Sarah and they'd gone, Emma turned to Nathaniel in the dim light of their lantern. "Are we doing the right thing?" she asked, vulnerability evident in her voice. "Offering a chance that might lead to terrible consequences." Nathaniel considered her question seriously, knowing platitudes would dishonor the gravity of their situation. "I believe," he said slowly, "that denying someone the opportunity to choose their own fate is its own kind of wrong. We're not forcing this path on them, we're simply making it possible if they want it." Emma nodded, seemingly comforted by his reasoning. "It's strange," she mused as they extinguished the fire and gathered their belongings. "When I came to Green River, I thought I was leaving behind the more dangerous work. I never imagined I'd find myself planning an escape again." "You never imagined you'd find me either," Nathaniel said with a small smile, trying to lighten the mood. She looked up at him, her expression softening. "No, I didn't, and that has made all the difference." As they climbed the ladder out of the root cellar, the cold December air a shock after the warmth below, Nathaniel helped Emma up the last few rungs, his hands lingering at her waist. When her feet touched solid ground, she turned in his arms, her face upturned to his. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "I don't regret any of this." He kissed her then, gently at first, then with growing intensity as she responded, her arms encircling his neck. The night air, the danger of their circumstances, the uncertainty of their future all faded against the certainty of this connection. When they finally parted, breathless, Nathaniel rested his forehead against hers. "Nor do I," he murmured, "not for a moment." 3 days later, Harriet gave them her answer. She and Sarah would attempt to escape during the Christmas holiday. With that decision made, their focus shifted to preparation, gathering supplies, planning routes, arranging the network of safe houses that would guide mother and daughter northward. Emma's connections from her Philadelphia days proved invaluable. Through carefully coded letters, she arranged for assistance at key points along the journey. Nathaniel, meanwhile, focused on the practical aspects: food, warm clothing, and a detailed map marking safe water sources and terrain to avoid. The gravity of what they were planning settled over them both, lending a new intensity to their relationship. They found themselves cherishing simple moments, walks through town, shared meals, quiet conversations, aware that everything could change in an instant. A week before Christmas, as Green River prepared for the holiday with evergreen boughs and ribbon decorations appearing in shop windows, Nathaniel invited Emma to dinner at the small house he rented on the edge of Samuel Wilson's property. It was the first time she'd visited his home, and he spent the entire day cleaning and preparing, conscious of the modesty of his accommodations compared to what she might have known in Philadelphia. Emma arrived as the winter sun was setting, her cheeks pink from the cold and her eyes bright with anticipation. She carried a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "I hope I'm not too early," she said as he welcomed her inside. "Right on time," he assured her, taking her coat and hanging it by the door. She looked around with evident interest at the simple one-room cabin with its neat bed in the corner, small table set for two, and crackling fire in the stone hearth. Books lined a rough-hewn shelf more than might be expected for a ranch hand, and a guitar leaned against one wall. "It's lovely," she said sincerely. "It feels like you." "It's not much," he admitted, suddenly self-conscious. "It's a home," Emma countered, moving to warm her hands by the fire. "That's not nothing, Nate," he smiled, her presence already making the familiar space feel different, warmer, more complete somehow. "I made venison stew," he told her, moving to the pot that hung over the fire, "and there's bread from town, nothing fancy." "It smells wonderful," she assured him, coming to stand beside him as he stirred the stew. "I didn't know you could cook." "Another skill from my drifting days," he explained. "A man gets tired of beans and bacon eventually." They ate by lamplight, the conversation flowing easily between them as it always did. Emma spoke of her students at the school, their progress and personalities, while Nathaniel shared stories of the ranch and the new horses they were breaking. Neither mentioned their plans for Harriet and Sarah directly, but the knowledge hovered between them, an unspoken connection. After the meal, as they sat before the fire with cups of coffee, Emma handed him the package she'd brought. "An early Christmas gift," she explained. "Since we'll both be away for the actual day." Nathaniel unwrapped it carefully to find a leather-bound journal, the cover embossed with his initials. "Emma, it's beautiful," he said, running his fingers over the smooth leather. "I thought you might use it to write down your thoughts," she said. "Or maybe stories someday. You have a way with words that shouldn't go to waste." Her thoughtfulness touched him deeply. He set the journal aside and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small wooden box. "I have something for you as well." Emma took the box, opening it to reveal a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. Her breath caught as she lifted it, the firelight catching on its polished surface. "Nate, it's exquisite," she whispered. "But this must have cost." "Open it," he interrupted gently. She did, and found inside a tiny pressed wildflower, a Texas bluebonnet. "From the meadow where we had our first real conversation," she realized, remembering their walk after church. Nathaniel nodded. "I went back the next day to find it. Thought you might like a reminder of when things began to change between us." Tears welled in Emma's eyes as she closed the locket. "Will you help me put it on?" He moved behind her as she lifted her hair, his fingers brushing the warm skin of her neck as he fastened the clasp. The simple intimacy of the gesture affected them both, and when Emma turned to face him, the emotion in her eyes mirrored his own. "I love you," she said softly, the words spoken aloud between them for the first time. Nathaniel cupped her face in his hands. "I love you too, Emma. More than I thought possible." Their kiss held both tenderness and growing passion, months of restrained feeling finding expression in the privacy of his home. Emma's hands moved to his shoulders, drawing him closer as the kiss deepened. And Nathaniel responded by pulling her gently onto his lap, cradling her against him as if she were precious beyond measure. When they finally parted, both breathing unevenly, the question in her eyes was clear. Instead of answering with words, Nathaniel brushed a strand of hair from her face and waited, giving her the space to decide. After a moment's consideration, Emma stood and took his hand, leading him toward the bed in the corner of the room. "I want this," she said simply. "I want you." That night changed everything between them, deepening their connection in ways that transcended the physical. As they lay together afterward, Emma's head resting on his chest and his arms encircling her, Nathaniel found himself contemplating a future he'd never dared imagine before, one with a home, a family, a life built on love rather than solitary survival. "What are you thinking?" Emma asked, her voice soft in the darkness. "That I don't want to lose this," he admitted. "That after everything with Harriet and Sarah is resolved, I want us to have a chance at a normal life together." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him, her expression serious in the dying firelight. "Are you asking me to marry you, Nathaniel Landry?" "I suppose I am," he realized, the certainty of it settling in his chest. "Not right away, there's too much at stake right now. But afterward, when it's safe." Emma smiled, tracing the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "Yes," she said simply. "I would be honored to be your wife whenever that day comes." The promise hung between them, fragile but profound, a commitment to a future they would have to fight to claim. As Emma settled back against him, her warmth a counterpoint to the winter chill beyond the cabin walls, Nathaniel allowed himself to hope that their dangerous mission might succeed and lead to the life they both desired. But first, they had to help Harriet and Sarah find their freedom. And that journey, with all its perils, was just beginning. Christmas Eve arrived with a light dusting of snow, unusual for that part of Texas, but creating a picture-perfect holiday scene in Green River. As planned, Emma boarded the stagecoach to Dallas with Mrs. Peterson that morning, a performance necessary for their alibi. She would disembark at the first stop, 5 miles outside town, where Nathaniel would be waiting with horses. The main street was quiet as Nathaniel made final preparations. Most businesses closed for the holiday and families gathered in their homes. He nodded politely to the few people he encountered, maintaining the appearance of a man with ordinary errands while his mind raced through the details of their plan. By noon, he had met Emma at the arranged location, and they were riding toward the abandoned homestead where Harriet and Sarah would join them after dark. The day stretched endlessly, each hour bringing new anxieties as they considered all that could go wrong. "We should go over the route again," Emma said as they waited in the root cellar, surrounded by the supplies they'd gathered. "Just to be certain." Nathaniel unfolded the map he'd prepared, though they both knew it by heart. "From here to the Johnson farm is 15 miles northwest," he began, tracing the path with his finger. "They'll hide you in their barn tomorrow night. Then it's another 20 miles to the creek crossing, where Reverend Miller's son will meet you with a wagon." Emma nodded, following his hand as it moved across the paper. "And from there to the territorial border where my contact will take over." "Exactly." Nathaniel refolded the map carefully. "The most dangerous part is the first night getting far enough from Green River that no one connects their disappearance with us. Which is why you need to be seen in town tomorrow," Emma reminded him. "Attend the Christmas service at the church. Make sure people remember you were there." The plan was for Nathaniel to remain behind, establishing an alibi for them both by explaining that Emma had taken the stagecoach to Dallas. Meanwhile, Emma would accompany Harriet and Sarah for the first part of their journey until they reached the relative safety of the Johnson farm, known sympathizers to the abolitionist cause. "I still think I should come with you," Nathaniel said, not for the first time. "At least for the first day." "We've discussed this," Emma replied gently. "If both of us disappear, even for a day, it raises questions. This way you can misdirect any suspicions and join us later if needed." She was right, of course, but it didn't ease his concern about letting her face the initial dangers alone. Before he could argue further, they heard the prearranged signal, 3 soft knocks on the trapdoor above. Harriet and Sarah descended the ladder moments later, their faces tense with a mixture of fear and determination. They carried almost nothing, a small bundle of food, a change of clothes for each of them, and the Bible Emma had given Sarah upon learning to read her first complete sentence. "No one saw us leave," Harriet reported. "Master and Mrs. left yesterday for Dallas. The overseer's been drinking since noon." "Good," Emma said, her teacher's demeanor giving way to the focused efficiency Nathaniel had come to recognize in their planning sessions. "We should move quickly while we still have some darkness." They divided the supplies among 3 small packs, keeping the loads balanced for easy carrying. Sarah, unusually quiet, sat on one of the benches clutching her Bible. Nathaniel knelt beside her. "Nervous?" he asked gently. She nodded, her eyes wide. "What if we don't make it, Mr. Landry?" The question struck him with its simple honesty. He could have offered platitudes or false reassurances, but Sarah deserved better. "There are risks," he acknowledged, "but your mother and Miss Emma are smart and brave. And there are good people waiting to help you along the way." "Will I ever see you again?" she asked, the question catching him off guard. He glanced up at Harriet, who watched them with a sad smile, then back to Sarah. "I hope so," he said honestly. "Maybe someday when you're grown and the world is different than it is now." Sarah considered this, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, smooth stone. "I found this by the creek," she said, pressing it into his hand. "It's for luck. Mama says everybody needs a little luck." The simple gift nearly undid him. "Thank you, Sarah," he managed, closing his fingers around the stone. "I'll keep it with me always." The farewell that followed was brief by necessity, emotion tempered by the urgency of their task. Nathaniel helped them load the horses. Harriet and Sarah would ride double on one, Emma on the other, and provided last-minute instructions about the terrain ahead. When it came time to say goodbye to Emma, he found himself struggling for words. She seemed to understand, reaching up to touch his cheek gently. 3 days, she reminded him. "Meet us at the crossing as planned." He nodded, covering her hand with his own. "Be careful, always." She stretched up to kiss him quickly, mindful of their audience. "I love you, Nate." "I love you too," he replied, helping her onto her horse. "Now go, while the moon is still high." He stood watching as they rode away, three dark shapes against the silver-touched landscape until they disappeared into the tree line to the north. Only then did he allow himself to acknowledge the fear that gripped him, not just for their physical safety, but for the future they'd planned together should anything go wrong. The stone Sarah had given him was still clutched in his hand. He slipped it into his pocket, a talisman against the long hours of waiting ahead. Nathaniel returned to town as dawn broke on Christmas Day, the streets empty as families celebrated in their homes. He attended the morning church service as planned, exchanging appropriate holiday greetings with townspeople who expressed surprise at seeing the usually absent ranch hand among the congregation. "Miss Calloway convinced me to make an appearance," he explained to Reverend Thomas's inquiries, establishing the connection while reinforcing her absence. Before she left for Dallas, that is. The day passed with excruciating slowness. He visited Samuel Wilson's home briefly, accepting a plate of Christmas dinner with appropriate gratitude while fabricating details of Emma's journey to Dallas. By evening, he had been seen by enough people to establish his presence in town, allowing him to retire to his cabin without arousing suspicion. There, alone with his thoughts, he paced the small space, calculating the traveler's progress. If all had gone according to plan, they would be reaching the Johnson farm soon, their first safe haven. He wouldn't know for certain until he met them at the creek crossing in 3 days, as arranged. The uncertainty was its own kind of torture. Every distant sound made him tense, anticipating a knock at the door announcing that Harriet and Sarah had been discovered missing, that suspicion had fallen on Emma, that their entire plan had unraveled. To distract himself, he opened the journal Emma had given him and began to write not the elaborate stories she had imagined, but a simple account of how they had met, what they had done, and why. If things went wrong, he wanted a record to exist, a testament to the fact that they had tried to do what was right in a world that made such choices difficult. The next 2 days followed a similar pattern. Nathaniel made appearances in town, casually mentioning Emma's holiday visit to Dallas when asked, while using the private hours to prepare for his own journey to the creek crossing. On the morning of the 3rd day, he informed Samuel Wilson that he needed to check fence lines on the northern property, providing an excuse for his absence. With his saddlebags packed and his rifle cleaned, Nathaniel set out before dawn, taking a circuitous route to avoid being seen heading directly north. The winter landscape was austere but beautiful, frost lingering in shaded areas despite the midday sun. Under different circumstances, he might have appreciated the solitary ride, but now each mile only increased his anxiety. He reached the creek crossing by mid-afternoon, a secluded spot where the water ran shallow enough for easy fording. The agreed meeting place was a stand of cottonwoods on the far bank, providing cover from the open plains beyond. Nathaniel dismounted, leading his horse to water before settling in to wait. Hours passed with no sign of them. The sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks that would soon give way to darkness. Doubt crept in as shadows lengthened. Had they been delayed, captured? Had they missed the crossing and continued without him? Just as despair began to take hold, he spotted movement on the northern ridge, 3 riders approaching cautiously. Relief flooded through him as he recognized Emma's distinctive posture, and beside her, Harriet and Sarah still riding together. He stepped into the open, waving to signal his location. Minutes later, they were dismounting beside him, faces tired but triumphant. "You made it," he breathed, embracing Emma tightly before turning to Harriet and Sarah. "Any troubles along the way?" "None we couldn't handle," Emma replied, the pride in her voice evident. "The Johnsons were wonderful, gave us extra provisions and fresh horses. And Sarah read them a Bible verse as thanks," Harriet added, her arm around her daughter's shoulders. "Made them cry, it did." Sarah smiled shyly, clearly pleased with the memory. "Mr. Johnson said I read better than his own grandson." "I don't doubt it," Nathaniel said, ruffling her hair gently. "You're the quickest learner I know." They made camp there by the creek, using the remaining daylight to prepare a small fire in a depression where its light wouldn't be visible from a distance. Over a simple meal of jerky, biscuits, and coffee, Emma recounted their journey thus far: the night ride from Green River, the days spent hidden in a thicket while patrols passed nearby, the welcome they'd received at the Johnson farm. "Reverend Miller's son should meet us tomorrow about 10 miles north of here," she explained as they studied the map by firelight. "From there, it's another 3 days to the territorial border." Nathaniel nodded, calculating the timeline. "When do you need to start back to maintain your alibi?" Emma's expression sobered. "Tomorrow evening at the latest. The stagecoach from Dallas returns the following afternoon." The reality of their imminent separation hung heavy between them. Harriet, sensing the moment, quietly led Sarah to the far side of their small camp to prepare for sleep, giving them privacy. "I could still come with you," Nathaniel suggested once they were alone. "All the way to the border." Emma shook her head, her fingers intertwining with his. "You know that's not possible. One of us needs to return to deflect suspicion and continue the work with our other students." She was right, of course. If both disappeared, the connection to Harriet and Sarah's escape would be obvious. By returning separately and resuming their normal lives, they might protect both themselves and the underground network that had made the escape possible. "I don't like the idea of you traveling back alone," he admitted. "The return journey is less dangerous," she assured him, "and I'll be careful." They sat in silence for a while, watching the flames dance and listening to the soft murmur of the creek. Tomorrow would bring another parting, and though they would see each other again in Green River, something fundamental would have changed. They would share not only the secret of their teaching, but the deeper secret of having helped slaves escape a crime that could separate them permanently if discovered. "When you get back," Emma said softly, "find Isaiah. Let him know what happened, but only in the most general terms. The less they know, the safer everyone will be. And our lessons will resume in a few weeks once any suspicion has died down." She squeezed his hand. Different location, perhaps, but the same purpose. The certainty in her voice reassured him. Despite the risks they'd taken, despite those still ahead, their commitment to the work remained unshaken. And beyond that work lay the future they'd begun to envision together: a marriage, a home, a life built on shared principles. "I'm proud of what we've done," he told her, pulling her closer to his side. "Whatever happens." She rested her head against his shoulder, the firelight catching the silver locket at her throat. "So am I," she whispered. "So am I." The morning brought clear skies and renewed determination. They broke camp efficiently, ensuring no trace of their presence remained, and set out northward along the creek. Sarah rode with Nathaniel now, chattering about all she had seen on the journey and the stories Emma had told her about the free states where colored children could attend school openly. By mid-morning, they reached the appointed meeting place, a crossroads marked by a solitary oak tree. Reverend Miller's son, James, was already waiting with a covered wagon, his solemn face breaking into a smile as they approached. "Right on time," he greeted them, helping Harriet down from her horse. "We should move quickly. I've heard rumors of slave catchers working north of here." The news brought a renewed sense of urgency. They transferred Harriet and Sarah's meager possessions to the wagon, which had been specially modified with a false bottom where they could hide if necessary. As James made final preparations, Emma took a moment to say her goodbyes. "Remember everything we taught you," she told Sarah, embracing the girl tightly. "And keep reading whenever you can. Books will open the world to you." Sarah nodded, tears in her eyes despite her brave smile. "Will I ever see you again, Miss Emma?" "I hope so," Emma replied, echoing Nathaniel's earlier words. "The world is changing, Sarah. Maybe someday, when you're grown, we'll meet again in a better place." Harriet's farewell was briefer but no less emotional. The two women embraced, bound by a shared risk that transcended their different circumstances. "God bless you both," Harriet said, including Nathaniel in her gratitude. "What you've done, there aren't words enough." "Just be safe," Emma told her. "And when you reach Canada, send word through the network if you can. We'll sleep easier knowing you've made it." With final embraces and whispered good wishes, Harriet and Sarah climbed into the wagon. James secured the canvas covering, nodded once to Emma and Nathaniel, and set off northward, the creaking of wheels gradually fading into the distance. Emma stood watching long after the wagon had disappeared from view, her expression a mixture of accomplishment and loss. Nathaniel waited beside her, understanding that this moment represented both an ending and a beginning, the culmination of months of dangerous work, and the start of whatever would come next for them all. Finally, she turned to him, wiping away a tear. "We should head back," she said, practicality reasserting itself. "I need to reach town by tomorrow afternoon." They rode south together, retracing the route along the creek. Unlike the journey north, which had been marked by constant vigilance and caution, this return trip carried a different tension, the knowledge that they would soon part ways again. Emma continuing alone to Green River, while Nathaniel diverted to establish his alibi of checking fence lines. They made camp that evening in a sheltered hollow, sharing the last of their provisions. As darkness fell, they held each other close beneath their shared blankets, finding comfort in physical connection when words seemed inadequate for all they felt. "When will I see you again?" Nathaniel asked as dawn approached, knowing their parting was near. "I'll return on tomorrow's stagecoach," Emma replied, her fingers tracing the contours of his face as if memorizing them. "Come to the schoolhouse the day after we can speak then," he nodded, pressing his lips to her palm. "Be careful." "Always," she promised. Their farewell, when it came, was brief by necessity. With one last kiss and whispered declarations of love, they parted ways, Emma riding southeast toward the stagecoach route, Nathaniel southwest toward the Wilson Ranch. As he watched her figure grow smaller in the distance, he felt both pride in what they'd accomplished and fear for what might come next. But beneath those emotions ran a current of hope that Harriet and Sarah would find the freedom they sought, hope that he and Emma might someday claim a life together without secrets or danger, hope that their small acts of defiance might contribute to a larger change. With that hope sustaining him, Nathaniel turned his horse toward home. The small stone Sarah had given him a reassuring weight in his pocket. The days following their return to Green River were a careful performance. Emma arrived on the stagecoach from Dallas as planned, greeted by Mrs. Peterson and several other townspeople who eagerly sought news of the city. Nathaniel returned from his supposed fence, mending with appropriately mundane reports for Samuel Wilson. They maintained their distance publicly, meeting only briefly after church on Sunday with others present. It was Wednesday before they could speak privately, in the schoolhouse after classes had ended for the day. Emma was arranging books on shelves when Nathaniel entered, closing the door quietly behind him. "Has there been any news?" he asked without preamble, removing his hat. Emma glanced toward the window, ensuring they weren't observed, then shook her head. "Nothing yet, but that's to be expected. They wouldn't have reached the territorial border until yesterday at the earliest." Nathaniel nodded, accepting her assessment. "And here, any suspicion?" "Some," she admitted. "Sheriff Taylor came by the boarding house asking questions about when exactly I left for Dallas and returned. Mrs. Peterson unwittingly provided my alibi, but I could tell he was fishing for inconsistencies." The news was concerning but not unexpected. "Harriet and Sarah's absence has been noticed then?" "Yes, though there seems to be some confusion about when they disappeared. Their master is claiming they must have run while the family was in Dallas, but the overseer insists they were present Christmas Eve morning." Emma's lips curved in a small, satisfied smile. "The contradictions are working in our favor." "For now," Nathaniel cautioned. "We should still be vigilant." Emma nodded, her expression growing more serious. "I've spoken with Isaiah and the others. We're suspending lessons for a month, at least until this dies down." It was the prudent choice, though Nathaniel knew how difficult it must have been for Emma to make. The progress their students had been making, the joy they found in learning, all paused because of the very real dangers they faced. "They understand," he assured her, seeing the regret in her eyes, "and they're proud of what happened even if we haven't told them the details." "I know," Emma sighed, setting down the book she'd been holding. "I just hate that this is necessary, that teaching people to read must be done in secret, that seeking freedom is considered a crime." Nathaniel crossed the room to her, taking her hands in his. "It won't always be this way," he said softly. "Change is coming, Emma. Maybe not as quickly as we'd like, but it's coming." She squeezed his hands, drawing strength from his conviction. "I hope you're right." They spent the next hour discussing practical matters: how to behave in public, what to say if directly questioned, where to resume their lessons when it became safe. The danger hadn't passed, but having a plan made it easier to face. As Nathaniel prepared to leave, mindful of maintaining appearances, Emma stopped him with a hand on his arm. "I've been thinking," she said, a hint of nervousness in her voice, "about what comes next for us." He turned back to her, waiting for her to continue. "When we spoke of marriage," she said, "it wasn't just a distant possibility to me, it was a promise I intend to keep." She took a deep breath. "Once we're certain Harriet and Sarah are safe, once the immediate danger has passed, I don't want to wait any longer than necessary." Her directness, so characteristic of the woman he'd fallen in love with, brought a smile to his face. "Nor do I," he admitted, "though we might need to be patient a while longer." "I've never been particularly skilled at patience," Emma replied with a small laugh, "but for us I'll try." They parted with a brief kiss, aware of the need for caution even in private. As Nathaniel rode back to his cabin, he found himself contemplating the future more concretely than before. A home with Emma, perhaps children someday, a life built on shared purpose and love. It seemed almost too much to hope for, given the risks they'd taken and those that still lay ahead. Yet hope persisted, stubborn as the Texas wildflowers that bloomed after even the harshest winters. 2 weeks passed without word of Harriet and Sarah. January brought colder weather and a sense of suspended animation to Green River. The disappearance of a slave woman and her daughter remained a topic of gossip, but as days turned to weeks with no trace found, interest gradually waned. Sheriff Taylor continued to watch Emma and Nathaniel with occasional suspicion, but without evidence, he could do little more than observe. Their courtship, once a subject of curious speculation, had become accepted as part of town life. They were seen together at church, occasionally shared meals at the hotel restaurant, and were generally regarded as a couple heading toward an expected conclusion. This public acceptance provided useful cover for their private concerns and planning. It was nearly February when the letter arrived. Emma received it along with other mail at the schoolhouse, an unmarked envelope containing a single sheet of paper with no signature. The message was simple. The package was delivered safely to its final destination. The recipients are well and send their deepest gratitude. The young one continues her studies with enthusiasm. Emma's hands trembled as she read the words, tears of relief springing to her eyes. That evening, when Nathaniel came to escort her from the schoolhouse, she wordlessly handed him the note, watching as understanding dawned on his face. "They made it," he whispered, the tension of weeks finally releasing from his shoulders. "They made it," Emma echoed, her smile radiant. "Sarah is free, Nate, actually truly free." They allowed themselves a moment of celebration, embracing in the privacy of the empty schoolhouse the knowledge of their success sweeter for having been so long awaited. "We should burn this," Nathaniel said reluctantly, indicating the letter. Emma nodded, though it pained her to destroy the tangible proof of Harriet and Sarah's freedom. "You're right. No evidence can remain." Together they watched the paper curl and blacken in the schoolroom stove, the words disappearing but the meaning preserved in their hearts. With confirmation of Harriet and Sarah's safe arrival in Canada came a sense of closure, allowing Emma and Nathaniel to look toward their own future with renewed focus. The immediate danger had passed, though they remained cautious, aware that suspicion could revive at any moment. In late February, after consulting with Isaiah and their other students, they cautiously resumed the reading lessons. They chose a new location, a cave in the limestone bluffs south of town, and implemented stricter security measures. Smaller groups met less frequently, with lookouts posted and escape routes planned. The work continued, more carefully but with no less conviction, as spring approached, bringing new growth to the Texas landscape. Nathaniel and Emma began making concrete plans for their life together. They decided to marry in April, when the wildflowers would be in bloom and the memory of winter's dangers further receded. Reverend Thomas readily agreed to perform the ceremony, having watched their courtship develop with approval. The announcement was met with general pleasure in Green River, where Emma had become a respected figure, and Nathaniel, while still somewhat reserved, had gradually integrated more fully into community life. On a sunny Saturday in mid-April 1859, Emma Calloway became Emma Landry in a simple ceremony in the same church where they had first agreed to speak about her clandestine teaching. She wore a dress of soft blue, with wildflowers in her hair instead of an elaborate veil. Nathaniel, uncharacteristically nervous, stumbled slightly over his vows but spoke with unmistakable sincerity. Among the witnesses were Isaiah and Margaret, seated quietly at the back of the church, their presence a private acknowledgement of the deeper connections that had brought the couple together. Samuel Wilson stood as Nathaniel's best man, having developed genuine respect for his reliable ranch hand over the years. The celebration that followed at the hotel was modest but joyful, with music and dancing continuing until evening. When the newlyweds finally departed for Nathaniel's cabin soon to be renovated and expanded, they carried with them not only the good wishes of their neighbors, but the profound satisfaction of having remained true to their principles while claiming their personal happiness. Life settled into new patterns after their marriage. Emma continued teaching at the schoolhouse, while Nathaniel accepted Samuel Wilson's offer to become foreman of the ranch, a position that provided increased income and responsibility. They expanded Nathaniel's cabin into a proper home, adding rooms and a covered porch where they often sat in the evenings, watching the sunset and discussing the day's events. Their secret work continued as well, adapted to their new circumstances. The reading lessons moved occasionally to their home when it was safe, with Isaiah and the others arriving under cover of darkness and leaving before dawn. Emma and Nathaniel took turns teaching, their different strengths complementing each other as they guided their students through increasingly advanced material. In the summer of 1860, their family grew with the birth of their son, Thomas Isaiah Landry, named partly for Reverend Thomas, who had married them, but more significantly for Isaiah, who had become a dear friend and mentor to them both. The elderly man wept when told of the honor, his weathered hands gently cradling the infant with a tenderness that transcended the barriers society placed between them. News from the wider world increasingly dominated conversations in Green River. Talk of secession, of conflict between North and South over the very issues that had driven Emma and Nathaniel's secret work, created tensions even in their remote corner of Texas. They watched these developments with concern, aware that the coming storm would impact not only their own lives but the future of all their students. When war finally came in April 1861, it brought new dangers and difficult choices. Texas joined the Confederacy, and patriotic fervor swept through Green River. Men enlisted, including many of the younger ranch hands at the Wilson property. Nathaniel, at 35 and now a father, was not immediately called upon, but the pressure to demonstrate loyalty to the Southern cause grew stronger. For a time, they considered heading west to California or north to free territory. But such a move would mean abandoning their students and the network they'd built. After many late-night discussions, they decided to remain, continuing their work with even greater caution in increasingly dangerous circumstances. The war years brought hardship to Green River as they did to communities throughout the South. Supplies grew scarce, and tensions heightened as news of battles reached them. Emma and Nathaniel maintained a careful balance, appearing sufficiently sympathetic to the Confederate cause to avoid suspicion, while privately continuing their subversive education efforts and occasionally helping escaped slaves move northward when opportunity allowed. Thomas grew from infant to toddler to young boy against this backdrop of conflict, bringing joy to his parents even in difficult times. He inherited his mother's quick mind and his father's quiet strength, and from both of them, a deep sense of justice that sometimes manifested in ways that made public concealment challenging. Why can't Martha's boy come to school with me? He asked one evening when he was 4, referring to the son of one of their students. He knows more letters than Billy Cooper, and Billy gets to go. Such innocent questions required careful answers, balancing truth with age-appropriate explanations and the necessary caution their situation demanded. Emma and Nathaniel did their best to instill their values while protecting their son from the potential consequences of speaking too openly. When news of the Emancipation Proclamation reached Green River in early 1863, it was received with defiance and dismissal by most of the town's residents. Texas, as part of the Confederacy, considered the proclamation irrelevant to their territory. But among Emma and Nathaniel's students, the news sparked both hope and anxiety. Hope that change was truly coming, anxiety about how that change would be implemented and at what cost. "It ain't real freedom yet," Isaiah cautioned the others during one of their lessons. "Not till the war ends and the law's enforced, but it's coming, sure as sunrise." His words proved prescient. The war continued for 2 more years, and even after Confederate surrender in April 1865, Texas remained resistant to implementing emancipation. It wasn't until June 19, 1865, later celebrated as Juneteenth, that Union General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston and announced that all slaves in Texas were free. The news reached Green River days later, setting off a chain of reactions that transformed the community. Some slave owners refused to acknowledge the proclamation, while others reluctantly complied while implementing work contracts that maintained much of the previous power dynamic. Violence erupted in several neighboring towns as newly freed people attempted to claim their rights. For Emma and Nathaniel, this tumultuous period brought both vindication and new challenges. Their years of secret teaching had prepared many in Green River's Black community with skills that would help them navigate freedom, the ability to read contracts, write their own names, and calculate wages. Yet these same skills marked them as targets for those resentful of changing social orders. Their home became an unofficial advising center, with former students coming to seek guidance on contracts, legal rights, and opportunities in other regions. Thomas, now 6 years old, observed these interactions with increasing understanding, asking questions that reflected his growing awareness of the society around him. In the fall of 1865, Emma made a momentous decision. With Nathaniel's full support, she approached the town council about establishing a school for the children of freed people. The proposal met with significant resistance, including outright threats from several prominent citizens. "You're pushing too hard, too fast," Sheriff Taylor warned her after one particularly contentious town meeting. "There are folks here who remember your sympathy for the Union during the war. Don't give them reason to make trouble for your family." But Emma persisted, gathering support from unexpected allies including Reverend Thomas, whose views had evolved through the war years, and surprisingly, Samuel Wilson, whose pragmatic nature recognized the changing times. By January 1866, a small school operated in a former storage building on the edge of town, with Emma teaching reading and writing 3 days a week to a dozen eager students. The other days, she continued at the main schoolhouse, maintaining her position in the white community while building bridges to the new educational opportunity. Nathaniel's role evolved as well. With Samuel Wilson's blessing, he began training and hiring freed men as ranch hands, offering fair wages and treating them with the respect denied them under slavery. It was a controversial approach in post-war Texas, but Wilson recognized the business sense in securing loyal workers during uncertain times. Their family continued to grow as well. In the spring of 1867, Emma gave birth to twin girls, Sarah Harriet and Margaret Rose, names that honored those who had shaped their journey together. Thomas, now 8, took his role as older brother seriously, reading to his infant sisters from the same primers once used in secret lessons. Life was not without continuing challenges. Hostility from those opposed to changing racial dynamics occasionally manifested in boycotts of Wilson's ranch, anonymous threats left at their door, and social ostracism from certain segments of Green River society. But they also found strengthening support from community members who recognized the inevitable tide of change and chose to move forward rather than resist. In 1870, a letter arrived that brought their journey full circle. Addressed to the Landrys of Green River, Texas, it came from a small town in Ontario, Canada, where Harriet and Sarah had settled after their escape years earlier. The letter, written in a careful hand that Emma immediately recognized as Sarah's, shared news of their life: Harriet's work as a seamstress, Sarah's education at a local school, their small but comfortable home. "I have never forgotten what you taught me," Sarah wrote. "Not just my letters, but the belief that I deserved to learn them. I am training to become a teacher myself now, hoping to pass that gift to others." The letter concluded with news that brought tears to both Emma and Nathaniel's eyes. "We have named our community reading room the Landry Library, in honor of those who risked everything to light the first spark of literacy in our darkest hours." As they sat on their porch that evening, the letter carefully preserved between them and their 3 children playing in the yard before them, Emma turned to Nathaniel with eyes that still held the determination he'd first seen more than a decade earlier. "We were right to stay," she said softly. "To continue the work here, even when it was hardest." Nathaniel nodded, taking her hand in his. "We were," he agreed, "though I sometimes wonder what might have happened if I hadn't followed you that day, if I'd turned away instead of asking why." Emma smiled, the years having added character to her face but diminished none of her spirit. "I believe you would have found your way back to your father's principles eventually, but I'm grateful we found that path together." Thomas called to them from the yard, eager to show how high he could push his sisters on the swing Nathaniel had built. As they rose to join their children, Nathaniel reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from a chance encounter outside a slave cabin to a life built on love, principle, and the quiet courage to stand for what was right, even when doing so carried profound risk. "So am I," he said, placing a kiss on Emma's temple as they walked toward their children. "More grateful than words can express." The path had not been easy, and challenges remained as the nation struggled to redefine itself in the aftermath of war. But in their corner of Texas, Emma and Nathaniel Landry had created a legacy that would continue long after them, in the lives of those they'd taught, in the community they'd helped reshape, and in their children who would carry forward the belief that education and dignity were rights belonging to all. It had begun with a dangerous secret, discovered by chance. It had grown into a love story intertwined with the larger narrative of a country in transformation. And like the wildflowers that return to the Texas hills each spring, it represented the persistent hope that even in the most difficult soil, something beautiful could take root and flourish.